from somebody in Carla Godfrey is the citizen's name, who had a wonderful experience with Officer Bailey. Her daughter was in a car accident, and she reached out to make sure that we knew how professional he, and I don't know who the other officer was that showed up, but kudos to the guys for that. You don't get those too often. That's a cool thing to have happen. Usually I duck tags on Facebook. They can get a little dangerous. So, all right, we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to call to order the work session today. That has. Okay, it is beyond my abilities. We'll leave. Okay, so we'll start this over again. I'm going to call to order the Board of Commissioners work session for Monday, June 11th. One item on the agenda, and by law, only one item can be on the agenda when it's about the budget, and it's to discuss the proposed fiscal 2018-29 budget ordinance. Motion to adopt the agenda. All those in favor? Aye. All right. So, Greg asked me to facilitate. First of all, I want to thank everybody for agreeing to come together. Budgets are never easy. Greg asked me to facilitate this. He wanted to bring all his department heads, and he wanted me to walk through some things so we can finalize and get to end of job and have a budget adopted in the time frame we need to. So one of the things, and I spent some time talking with Charlie Buckley, our attorney, and some others in terms of given some of the drama that's out on Facebook and misinformation about the budget, it's just, hey, it's time for us to do what we have to do and put together a balanced budget as required by law. So with that, I just want to remind everybody of what is going on here. And this is especially true for the citizens out there. By law, by charter, we have to pull together a budget. By law, by charter, the town manager is the budget officer, and he is to formulate and prepare a budget. He is to submit a recommended what is called an executive budget by the Local Government Budget and Fiscal Control Act, which is the state statute that governs what we do. It's our job to review, make adjustments, approve, finalize it as the majority of the board sees fit. We can establish the legal limits for appropriations. However, by law, we're required to appropriate for existing contracts. So all the discussion around the solid waste, Greg has no option there. He has an existing contract that he must appropriate, and until such time as we give direction going forward on solid waste and a contract can be renegotiated, by law, he has to appropriate that. Our limitation in terms of the budget ordinance is we appropriate at the department function or project level as defined in the budget ordinance, as defined in here. We can't budget at any greater level of specificity than that. We can discuss line item. Many of us have been in talking with Greg about line item, but we have no statutory authority to go in and adjust that budget. That's left, those line item budgets. That's left up to the budget officer. What we can do is have to bring those things up to the required department, function, and project level as defined in the budget. And I fully anticipate, as we saw with our finance director, Lisa White, she brought forward several budget ordinance amendments to the budget, some budget amendment ordinances. As we refine things, we find different revenues, move expenses, et cetera. That will occur during the year. A couple of clarification points as well. I think it's important for everybody in this town to understand we've been on a pay-as-you-go delivery model. It's delivered significant improvements. That's how I'd call it. Some would just say improvements. But we've invested over the last 2.5 years over $3 million in streets and sidewalks and over $2 million in parks and recreation improvements. That's a sizable chunk of investments. Yes, we used dollars from existing funds, our savings account. We also added additional staff capacity to attack deficiencies, some would call them rather gaps in growth and transportation management. And so that's where the monies have gone. It hasn't been frittered away. It hasn't been mismanaged by previous managers or the current manager. It's been directed towards things that were in long need to be addressed. But that model's no longer sustainable with where we are. Our reserve fund is at policy. We have no stretch. Greg will attest, he and I had a very lengthy conversation about how could we tweak it to maybe adjust some things. We don't have any leeway there in the fund policy at this point in time, the reserve fund at this point in time. As well as for all of our wants and even for our needs in an infrastructure basis. We have no funding sources identified for parks. We have no funding sources identified for future road infrastructure. So we start to address it in this one with the vehicle fee and the small transportation fund. We also have to acknowledge the fact that we're in growth. These are in a growth period, and that's not going away. These are straight from the Census Bureau, published last week as of their latest calculations. They calculate us through year-end 2017 at 15,147. A 6.7% increase year to year, a 52% increase since 2010. That puts stress. And as all of us have pointed out in various emails that have been floating around, as a board, we've not tweaked the goals from a year and a half ago. We haven't reestablished any existing goals, nor really created any new measurable goals, and I mean measurable. Yes, we say we want to address congestion. Yes, we say we want to do something about parks, but we haven't actually given solid, measurable direction to go. So where we are, what we have to do is very methodically go through this budget today and actually discuss, roll up the policy areas we want to address, if any, the operating expenses, the service areas that we want to modify, the capital expenditures, because that's what the budget is. And so we will have as broad a discussion as we can, but we have to get this back to that level to be able to have input for addressing the budget ordinance. If we have a question about any of those areas, we certainly, it's the manager's job and the budget officer's job to defend the budget, and he has been doing that in the meetings. Now's the time where we have to address it. So, methodically, what I thought we would do is just go through the policy areas, the service areas, and just have a respectful and discussion about these if there's anything that we want to do with them. If we can't roll them up, we'll have that discussion about how we roll them up. But let's get things out on the table that we've talked about in various places and get them on the table and move forward. So with that, policy level. Are there any policy areas that we wish to consider and we're on the expenditures now. Are we comfortable with what we have in these 4 policy areas? Benefits, salary, capital improvement plan, funding, and small transportation fund, or go the reverse sequence? I'm not trying to put any prioritization on any of these. I just list them. And I listed them based upon how I grabbed them out of the book. So,
can I add 2
with
more?
Which one?
Can I add something to that list?
I'm
curious about, you say salary, I would also, I don't know if you want to put it as a separate level, but bonuses I would think would be worthy of consideration under salary. And I would like to know more about employee education as a section under each division. I'd like to at least know what that is.
So, okay, so
at the right level that you're asking for?
I'm thinking about the education side of it because that's more of a departmental budget item. Salary and bonus is compensation, so we'll have that discussion. So anything else? All right. Small transportation fund for congestion road improvements. That came with a motor vehicle tax. Any further discussion on that? What do you want to do?
Can we clarify what vehicles this will apply to specifically? Because I've heard a great deal of confusion.
Vehicles.
Any vehicle that's a vehicle in the town of Waxhaw.
Well, what do you mean by any vehicle? Any vehicle registers at the DMZ, so that will include trailers, motorcycles, RVs?
Motorized, so if it's a trailer, it would not be,
You have to get a tag, you have to get a license plate.
but it's
for.
not motorized.
Okay. So anything motorized that you have to register with the DMV, so your trucks, your motorcycles, your RVs, anything like that is
Correct.
also included?
Correct.
Okay. That's a step in the right direction. At least I understand that now for certain.
Okay.
I don't support this.
Consensus then. Any other discussion? Do we support it, not support it?
Do not support it. That's me.
Support it.
Support.
May I ask a question? So for those commissioners that do not support, I'm just curious, have you brought forth any ideas for funding our transportation needs? I mean, how do you think we're going to go about paying this for the future if we do not put a plan in place?
Personally, I've suggested almost $200,000 or more in cuts, so I think I'm doing my fair share trying to find the cuts in the budget.
But isn't that a temporary solution to a long-term
No,
problem?
if you make a permanent cut in how much you provide to the public.
But with the increase in numbers that we are growing, I forget the numbers you just stated, year to year, even with $200,000, that's not going to support,
Oh, no,
down
that's
the
certainly not
line.
enough. There is more. That was just a beginning.
you know, so
I
Then-
didn't hear any suggestions from anyone else, so I started finding ways to cut. I believe we could cut even more than that.
So, okay, so we're never going to get to end of job. You're not the budget officer, he is. So,
I was asked a question.
okay, so we'll get to specific department stuff. This is a fund for roads, not supported. The answer to your question is funded through cutting the existing budget. That's the answer that was given.
Yes.
So,
And what was the total amount that we would be, Greg, was it, I'm trying to remember.
304,000.
304? 304. So we need more than $200,000 in
And I
cuts
said there would
anyways,
be more than $200,000?
if we would agree to that.
Yes. Obviously, any cut that I would propose would have to be agreed to by at least 2 more people. So if people don't want to
no,
cut,
we have
there
to,
will be no cuts.
no. Actually, any cut has to get into a department level, and then we have to agree to cut the department. That's the level that we have to be at. We are not budget line item officers.
Happy to suggest
So-
department level cuts.
We'll get to that. So right now, it's through cuts in other places. So that was the answer to your question, okay? Anything else on this?
On the transportation one?
Yep. Capital Improvement Plan funding. Currently, it is funded through, well, Capital Improvement Plan funding. Do we agree that we need this fund?
Can I ask a question about how it works?
How does it
Right.
work, Greg?
My understanding is this is money that will be put away and saved. What is the end goal of that savings account as it grows? Is that to pay for something in full? Is that to be, to allow us to take out a loan because we can show we have so much money in savings? What is the end purpose of that savings account?
It's to fund your CIP. So the CIP is the plan that we shared with you that's been worked on with Davenport and Company and our staff. The CIP is set up in a manner so that the board has options to fund some projects at a pay-as-you-go level, but then also to acquire debt for the future. The tool is there to allow the sizing of that debt to be determined by a board at a later time. So as we shared, the cornerstone of the CIP though is to continue to fund $650,000 into a capital reserve as we've done in the last couple of years. So it's based on that.
With the intention that some of that can be spent in the future or that it will be maintained and used to acquire debt?
So that
Some
650
combination
could be applied for debt service in the future, but if it's not there, then we wouldn't have access to it. But so it, again, would be a board decision about how much debt, how much pay as you go, but continuing to put 650 into the fund, and then there's some decisions to be made by this board or a future board as to whether there would be additional capital brought to the table in the form of a tax or not, or no more tax money.
But with that being an option, that at some future date, a board could say, we'd like to take out money from that account
And pay for a project.
and pay for a project.
Yeah, so, for instance, for a few years, the town of Waxhaw earmarked 2 pennies on the tax rate to go into a transportation fund. It was small, and it grew, and when Kensington Drive blew up and we had to either close it or fix it, all that money disappeared positively. It didn't disappear. It was all used, consumed by Kensington Drive to fix it. So that's thus we didn't have to borrow to make a fundamental fix to Kensington Drive. So that's how that was used. It was earmarked. It was not only an accounting language. It was not reserved for anything specific like the small transportation fund. So you got 2 things going here. So
there's nothing preventing us from next year saying, I want to take out 650,000 and use it for X project and voting on it as a board.
assuming the board can reach agreement on a set of goals and priorities, that's how it's used.
Okay, just checking.
Steve, what is the advantage or disadvantage to the town by putting that $650,000 away each year?
Well, it shows a commitment to projects. And so if you don't reserve dollars and put them into a fund for debt and for capital over time, what's naturally going to occur is your operating budget will consume those dollars. So this really is a very disciplined approach to running the organization so that the operating budget doesn't grow. I know there's some questions about operating costs, but this is a very disciplined approach to putting money aside and not spending it, because we could have easily come in with a budget that showed we were spending all the money on operating costs. And so we're taking a pretty principled approach to say save some money or it'll just naturally flow into operating costs and operating areas.
So it shows to us, it shows to the town that we're watching, the money that they're entrusting us with. But I also thought that it showed the rating agencies that we have the discipline, and when we go to borrow against our $12,570,000 debt capacity, the difference in 1% over 20 years is $1.5 million. So if we're serious about borrowing money at the best advantage to the town to pay for parks, to pay for roads, to pay for anything we want, then by having this fiscal discipline, putting that money away, slating it for projects that we know we have to do and maybe some we don't know about, does that or does it not improve our standing with Moody's, with Fitch, with Standard & Poor's when we go to get a rating?
So a long answer probably to a long question is it will absolutely improve your rating ability to have a favorable rating. We don't have a bond rating right now, so we'll go from being unrated to a rating at some point. We don't have to have a rating to borrow money from a bank, but if we're going to ever get into the bond market, we'll have to have a bond rating. A bank's going to, though, look at all the metrics that the bond rating agencies are going to look at, and the bond rating agencies have different metrics in 5 or 6 different categories that they look at, and they weight those a little differently. But your financial discipline, your planning, your fiscal responsibility, your policies, your staff expertise, the general economy, how much of a tax burden you currently are levying, and is there any, in their words, almost room? So is your tax rate reasonable, and is it set up in a way where you have some flexibility? All those things play into it, but one of the most important things that you can do is start the planning process and then show commitment and discipline to it. If they see us going back and forth year to year to year, and if, for instance, we changed our fund balance policy one year just because we were getting a little tight, they would view that very negatively versus a principled approach that says we've looked at it, we know what other communities are doing as far as their policy, and here's something that fits Waxhaw, and then we're going to stick to it. So it's really just having that plan, announcing what your plan is. The plan can have all kind of flexibility, and by that I mean the projects and the sizing of the CIP. They understand that varies year to year. So we'll have a 5-year CIP, and the year that really counts the most is the year that you're about to enter into, because you're going to have to pay for that year. So years 2, 3, 4, 5, and any out years, you're certainly planning for those years and thinking about those projects and trying to tee them up in a sequence. But that first year is really the year that affects the budget. So they want to know that you're looking 4 or 5 years out down the road, and with some assistance, we can do it, but looking at the projects and when that debt or other pay-as-you-go projects might come online, because there needs to be a smoothness to the CIP investment. Certainly, if we ever do have a bond issue, that would probably be issued in a pretty large amount, but then you've got a number of years to spend those funds down. So even if you have a large bond referendum that goes through, it doesn't mean that you issue all that debt at one time. So you have 7 years, and you can push it on out to 10 years to actually issue the debt. So if you had a $10 million referendum, or 15 or 20, you certainly don't have to go out and issue that debt right away. In fact, you don't ever have to issue the debt. You could let it lapse, but you'll never be in the position to fund some of the projects if we don't come up with a plan. The path of least resistance is really trying to continue a pay-as-you-go approach, but we will not address anywhere close to the needs that we have in front of us if we just stay on that pay-as-you-go 1 and 2 year window. The type investments that we have ahead of us are just too large to keep that approach.
Well, probably the best example is pay-as-you-go is Nesbitt Park. It's taken us 10 years to get restrooms built. I mean,
Can I ask you, Greg, where did you come up with this number, 650,000?
That's based on the investment that's in the budget this year. We had 300 in one park and 350 that went toward the Y Park, so that's a baseline. And I think the mayor referenced that one of the projects, which is the YMCA project, or the Kensington Road Soccer Field Park, we've been putting 350 aside for it every year for 3 years. So then another park had 300. So it's the combination of those two creates, in the year that we're in, a baseline for we knew we could do it this year. Why
Well,
not?
apparently we couldn't do it, though, without raising taxes.
That's
So,
the year that we're in today.
okay. Well, so I'm just saying, if we agree that we want a CIP, it does not necessarily mean it has to be that number of dollars every year either.
No, you can have a CIP that has no funding in it, but it's
Well, there's a difference between
Library.
zero funding and $650,000 a year. There's many, many, many levels in between there. 650,000 levels, actually. So, agreeing that we want a project, we want the CIP would be one question, I would think. And do we want it at that level? Would be another question, I would think.
so
Because
do we want a CIP?
yes,
Okay, everybody wants a CIP. All right, good. Do we have any preference for a level?
I would like to see it a little bit lower than that, since we're already talking about having to raise taxes in order to make that savings deposit. If we can't cover our outgo, we don't have as much to put in savings. So I would like to see a lower number than that suggested.
What do you suggest?
I don't know. I thought I wasn't supposed to make those kind of
No,
details.
I mean, no, we're talking at a policy level. What level do you want it to be at?
We know we had 350,000 because that was what we were accustomed to paying for the Waxhaw Fields, yes?
Mhm.
Okay. And you said, what was the other park that you added into that,
Nesbitt had 300,000 this year.
that we paid for this year? But we're also going up in our services significantly by the total cost of services because of the houses. So maybe 350,000 is what we need to put in there instead of 650,000.
Okay.
Are we allowed to address any department heads at this time, or
Address it to
Mr.
Greg, and
Greg?
he can,
just to get an example, what would be the cost to just open the gates at the 34-acre park in Waxhaw, on Waxhaw Marvin?
So although there have been numbers thrown out there, I don't think there's a number that I would commit to open the gate, because we haven't done a demo out there of the building, nor have we assessed the site. And so until we actually have some time to look at what it would take to open the gate, whatever that means, we know there would need to be parking, there would need to be some sort of restroom facility, so I don't feel comfortable giving a number that we haven't studied,
Why haven't we studied that?
because we don't have our project.
I'm confused. We want to open the park land that we own. Eventually, one would assume at some point in the future, we would want to open the park that we bought. What project don't you have? I'm confused.
The board has never given direction to go and do an analysis of that park and get it ready to consider for opening for sale or anything.
The majority of the board has never given
Yes.
direction.
Well, the board has never given direction to analyze that property. The only things the board gave direction to were to have others analyze it at one point in time, specifically Trayton. And that's where some of the numbers came from. But it is sat as a no trespassing zone since the day it was purchased.
Is there a cost associated with directing Greg to find out what that cost is?
Not at this meeting. We can't do it at this meeting. We can do.
I'm just asking for the future.
Well, there's certainly a cost to actually going out and assessing that.
My whole purpose for the question
Hang on a
is not
second.
to...
Hang on a second.
Okay.
Let's just.
Okay.
Let's all pause. There is a cost.
Okay.
We could have Greg assess anything we want. The harsh reality is, though, we need to establish a set of goals and direction that we want to give him on parks, because otherwise these just become anecdotal. And that's what happened with the 34 acres. We've heard everything from $250,000 to $1.7 million just to get it ready. Thus, I know you won't throw any number out there, but I'll put the range out there. And we have probably the biggest fear from a liability standpoint, a pond that skyrockets our liability, just skyrockets our liability. And to get that open and prepared, we're going to need some outside advice on that. Okay, wait a minute, Tracy, first.
I'm sorry.
Okay?
What my whole purpose of asking that question was just so that we could have an idea of how much a project actually costs. So that was my reason for asking that. But say, just to use an example of Town Creek Park, when that was opened as just a paved trail, I mean, I don't even know if that would be, it's probably not even compared, but,
Well, that's a good example. That was committed to as a town as a Frisbee golf course,
okay.
and then nothing happened with it. So, I mean,
I'm just trying to
Yeah,
get a
so-
ballpark idea of how much a project costs, so that we know when Commissioner Lee is asking about a dollar amount for the CIP, I mean, we want to make sure we can fund a project if we choose a project. So how do we, that's to me how we come up with a number.
so you have to define the project. I think all Greg said was, we haven't even done an assessment of where it is. You're asking, what would it take to open? He gave put some elements out there, but until he assesses the property, he can't really cost out that project. There is a cost. Is it $10 or $15 or $30,000 to have somebody go and look at establishing a actual project for a park like that? I mean, to make sure that you assess where the sewer lines are, assess where the water pipes would go, all that stuff.
I think we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Yeah.
I think we put in place a policy in February that said we're going to do a Parks and Rec master plan, and when that's done, and it points out the direction that we're going in, that's when we begin to talk about which piece, how much, what it would be used. I think the conversation here is off the track.
And that's what I was saying about, I'm not trying to start a discussion on parks right now. I'm just trying, when the question was, how much we should be funding a CIP, I just kind of wanted an idea of how much a project costs.
Your manager recommended $650,000 based upon his experiences.
Sounds good.
That's
To be paid for by increased fees and taxes.
to be paid for out of the budget.
Yes. My only question is, to put it in layman's terms, I have to pay all my bills each month before I can put something in my savings account. If I can't pay all my bills, I can't put money in my savings account. So if I try to do it the other way around and say I have to put this much money savings first and then start paying bills, at some point in time, Warner Cable's going to call me.
And some point in time, we're going to have to come to grips with the fact that we can't build a park or open the door for a park unless we come up with the money. So We can,
Yes.
so we can do away with the
That's
capital
absolutely-
improvement
I
plan.
didn't say I wanted to do
No,
away
no,
with
hang
it.
on a second. Let me, I'm not in arguing, I'm saying we can do away with the capital improvement plan, or we could do away with Parks and Rec in general, because that's a want, not a need.
Absolutely, it's
So
not a need.
those are things that we can talk about.
I just
this-
questioned, do we need to do this, can we afford to do the savings at this level? That was my question.
650, 300, 350? Those, 350.
Or any variation therein, if somebody else wants to throw out a number.
I would suggest 400.
Okay, so,
Fine with that.
so those are 400.
I'm satisfied with the budget as proposed.
I trust what our town manager is recommending.
400,000 sounds reasonable to me.
400?
To Greg, are you suggesting that 650 is a reasonable amount, that we keep this funded,
That's my recommendation.
650?
Salary, let's talk about that in terms of compensation.
I have a question back on projects.
Yep.
Greg, just asking, there's been a lot of talk during the budget meetings and before about public services. How are we, and you said several times that we're on a fast track looking for land and wanting to do that. How are we going to fund that?
So we have in the CIP I would call it basically a placeholder for that project. There's $1,050,000, I believe, or 1.15 in the CIP for that. That project and the YMCA Kensington Road soccer field project would be two projects that we would have to go to a bank for debt. So the two of those together are the most ripe projects, even though they still have a number of months still before they would be ready to be in a funding category. But those two projects are the furthest forward in the CIP. I would put the soccer field project is in a category that's more ripe and ready to go, certainly than the public services facility. Once we're able to identify a piece of property that's appropriate size, that project should not take very long, though, because it's not very complex.
We were just talking about making plans and you doing a estimate of the park. Do you have an estimate, and have you done that research on what the land possibly could cost and the building? Has any of that been put together, or is just throwing out $1 million?
No, it's very, very much based on what it would cost to build a facility and to possibly acquire land. And so,
So those plans are somewhere?
there's not a written plan for that. That's based on my experience of building one of these before.
Where do we get the money if you find that land next month? You have to buy the land before somebody else buys it.
Yeah, so it will depend on the size and the cost of that, but we're going to have to look at what our strategy is and can we afford, if there's acquisition costs involved in trying to purchase it and then go to a bank down the road and roll that land cost into the facility cost. So if and when we have more specifics on that, we would come back to you with a plan, though, for that.
Purchase it and then what would you purchase it with? I'm sorry.
We have funds on hand, so you would have to have some sort of approach that would allow us to go to a bank once we had construction financing, and then we would replenish our fund balance at that point in time. But we would come to you with a plan.
So that would come out of fund balance?
Well, no, what he's talking about is what's called a reimbursement resolution. So like if we got a deal on a piece of land and we had to close in a month, that may not be enough time to get the debt approved, because to get debt approved you have to go to the LGC and it's a long process. So what you do is you pass a reimbursement resolution, and that allows you to pay cash, because we do have cash reserves, and then we get the loan, and then the loan pays back the cash reserves. So it's a typical thing for when you have to make a fast decision or you have to start a project before the loan comes through.
Is that something you would be empowered to do before coming to us? Because I know when the leaf dump was bought, it was bought and then the board found out.
No, it wasn't, and it's a compost facility, and it was not just bought. That was a discussion that was had with the board. Doesn't mean that everybody on the board agreed with it, but that was a discussion that was had with the board.
Wasn't a down payment put down?
No. The manager did not have authority to go purchase real estate without the approval of the board. It cannot happen.
Okay.
That cannot happen. Now, there was lots of discussions along the way, but that cannot happen that way.
Are we in salary now?
But in terms of, back to your question, on capital improvement or a project like that, that would have to come back with some detail for us to actually approve. So, all right, salary bonus, compensation, the whole compensation area. Are we comfortable with where we are at with salary and compensation for the staff in 2018, 19, what year are we in? 18, 19. You had a question about bonus. I'm not sure what that was.
Well, I'm just wondering if we can afford bonuses, if we're reaching out for raising taxes.
What's your comment on bonus?
I know it's only about $9,000 total, but, and I certainly don't want to take that away from employees who deserve it. But at the same point, if we have to reach out and say we don't have the money,
Talking about holiday
taxes.
pay,
Holiday.
holiday. Is that what you're mentioning as holiday?
No, there's line items in every division says bonus.
Yeah. So it's it's what we give.
Holiday time.
$200 per employee for Christmas.
Okay, that's different than a bonus to me, so that's fine by me. What is our increase pay raise rate right now?
2.5%?
It's budgeted at 2.5%.
2.5%, which is below the industry mark. That also includes the output from the study we did on the salary study with the police department to address some of the gaps that we had there. And certainly, gosh, just go to Charlotte and see the struggles they're having with their budget in terms of trying to up their game there to keep their police officers. So, yeah, but it's 2.5%, less than the 3.
The only concern I had with it was everything I read and everything I hear, this is one of the tightest labor markets that we've experienced in years. And I have been around many times when this happened, and I've watched people leave one job for another for 25 cents an hour. Is 2.5% sufficient to keep the employees that you have in this kind of a market?
We think that it is. We think that the board needs to consider an ongoing merit-based program, which is what the board typically has done. The merit program here is based on evaluations, so our staff is doing evaluations of all of our employees currently. Those will range from 0 to 3%. The budgeted amount is 2.5%. We manage to the budget, so that means that there are employees that will get 0, and then there are those that'll be in the middle of that range, and there'll be that'll be at the higher end of the range. But we looked at it last year because one of the questions essentially was, is that program for show, or do you actually evaluate people? And the answer is we evaluate people. And I think last year it was about a 50-50, and not quite 50-50 because the percentages don't work to 50-50 and 0, but we had some folks that were on the no end of the scale last year, and then we had not a bell-shaped curve, but what you're wanting to achieve with a merit program.
This is, what, year 3 of merit? I mean, there was a change. Is that right, Wendy? Yeah.
Last year was 3%.
Yeah. Okay. So it's 0.5%
We
less.
lowered it.
Greg, I have a question. I know we have a range, a lower range, and a top range for each position. So when a person reaches that top position and there's nowhere else for them to go, how do you compensate for that? Do you change their title where it's a different range, or does their increase stop?
So a max is a max, and our personnel policy has language that addresses that, but we don't position, shop, or retitle people just because they might hit a max there. part of an effective merit-based personnel program, though, is looking at your pay plan on a periodic basis and making sure that you get it right. If you do that on a periodic basis, then part of that discipline is to look at the ranges and look at your minimums, your max, your midpoints, and then go back and effectively look at where you're having to bring people in. Because your minimum sets the baseline of something that you're not going to pay below for. But the reality is, to Commissioner's point, is that sometimes the labor market tightens up, sometimes it's looser, sometimes you have to pay below the minimum just to get somebody on. And so, is your minimum a true minimum or not, or is it a guideline and a range? So part of that would be every 5 years. It's kind of one of the benchmarks that people often use to say if you haven't looked at your pay and classification plan in 5 years, you need to. But that'll look at those upper limits. I don't, off the top of my head, know that we have very many situations where that's a problem. In other organizations I've seen where you did have a problem with that particular thing, but if we have it, it's not very widespread at all here.
Okay, and with the leaf compost site, our equipment is getting older, used. So is there a plan to replace that equipment? And what would be the cost of that? I don't think I saw anything in this year.
There was a replacement. There was a replacement in this year's budget that we're currently in right now.
One truck?
For a vacuum trailer.
So as we move forward, you have how many trucks, Todd? 2. So the next truck needs to be replaced. Is that new or is it old?
So the one that was just came in brand new. So
I mean the other one. Is there a time
it's a used
frame?
The only two we have is we bought from Concord on Gov Dennis. We got them for both of them for $7,000.
Okay.
For use.
Good deal.
And they've only got another, but one of them we don't use for a spare because this is getting on its last leg. But the other one's only good for another 5 years. And I mean, you can keep rebuilding it. The motors and all are good. Sometimes you have to replace the impellers or the hoses or something like that. They can go off.
And I just want clarification on the land use, as far as the use of the land running out or having a time limit. Can you explain that to me again? Where, I think we talked about this in a couple of other meetings, and I left not really understanding that.
Can we table that until we get to the service area and just,
Okay.
I'll make sure we close on the salary part. That's all, I just want to make sure.
I have
Salary, bonus, compensation part.
a compensation question.
Yep.
We have in the budget, in some divisions, a lot of money budgeted aside for overtime that we're expecting. And I understand you always have to have, that safety net. But some of these divisions, like we know the police overtime, they're worked night and day by all of our events and similar things. Has there been a concentrated effort to try to find ways to reduce the overtime that many of our employees are being asked to put in so that we can reduce those costs?
There's the overtime.
I mean, police is the one that you mentioned,
Then
and so
public
yes.
So that's just the top one. We've got,
Public
see, I wrote
services
it all
and
down
events
for
are
myself here
because they work in
somewhere.
events.
I mean, I think the overtime question comes
Clerk's
back.
office has overtime, finance department, IT, police, building inspection, planning, parks and rec, events, and public services all listed overtime.
So yes, those managers are all asked to be actively involved in managing their overtime needs. The police and the event staff and the public services staff, a lot of that is tied to the events that we have each year. So there's
So if we could reduce the events, we would reduce a lot of external other costs that are related to that.
I would say it would depend on the event.
Okay, but there are ways beyond, there are options that are beyond one division manager's purview that would cascade, that could cause a reduction in those expenses.
Sure.
Any other questions on the salary? We're comfortable with the 2.5% and I understand why you have to call it a Christmas bonus because of the tax reasons, because it used to be a gift card. But anyway, Any other questions there? Okay, benefits. Do we have any questions there? I'm not sure there's much you can do there. Certainly, I tested the medical, and that's very much in line with what we're seeing at the league on the pool side of it. So, kudos to Wendy and team for bringing it in as much as you can. But the fact that it's more competitive makes it more desirable by the employees and their families, and it mirrors the situation that we're having at the league as well. We're getting more and more people to join into the pools with their family members because of where healthcare is. But that said, any questions about benefits that we want to consider?
I have a question about benefits. What is the town's participation in the healthcare? Is it 100% for employees and a percentage?
For the employee, it is 100%. For the families, it's a percentage. It's a shared cost for the family coverage.
Is that typical for 100%? I mean, I've always had to pay for my insurance, or at least half of it.
It is in most municipalities. There are some municipalities that have approached it slightly different, the city of Charlotte being one, where the employee pays a portion of theirs, but then they've upped the amount that they're paying on the family. They're kind of the flyer, and that's one area where people did not want to mimic the city because of their approach to that. But most of the towns that I'm aware of, all of them are paying 100%.
Yeah, that was a move in the private sector about 5 years ago, to flip to pay the employee and then increase the cost for any dependent that you might have. So, right or wrong, that continues to evolve. Okay, service areas. What service areas do we wish to modify? What's the objective? What's the impact? Commissioner Burns, do you want to go back to the compost facility and the equipment and stuff now?
Yeah, just the same question. Explain to me the end use of the property.
So the property, as I understand it, was bought for a compost facility, and there was some discussion, and I wasn't here at the time, about whether or not it could be expanded and there could be additional property added to it for public services. For whatever reason, that did not occur. I don't know that we have any sort of end-of-life written projection on that piece of land. I think it's going to be based on how it's used, and Todd's using it well, and they're learning each year with the composting collection in the season. But right now, there's no plan to utilize it for anything else other than what it was purchased for.
But once the compost keeps getting year after year fuller and fuller, how long can you keep putting the compost there without getting rid of it, is kind of what I'm wondering.
If we would not give away any compost or sell it or however you all choose to do, you could probably put leaves out there for another 8 years.
Okay.
But once you start distributing it out, I mean, what's out there right now is 3 years worth of leaves. And the pile in the middle is starting to get smaller and smaller. It's turning into dirt now. So by the time we start in November, we'll have nothing out there but dirt.
Okay. So you're using that much of it to empty?
Oh yeah, we use, well, a good example, there in front of your house, for years we had there's nothing but just
Red
no
mud.
grass at all. But we started putting that out there, and you see how green the grass is. So we're using a lot of it downtown. We give some away to citizens if they want it. Yeah. I mean,
I love your compost.
It's good for the garden and also, and it's all leaves. What we have now is just all leaves. What we had before was a little bit of everything. But right now, what we have is just all leaves. Because all the grass clippings, wood, and all that goes to another place.
So the plan is to get rid of it every year?
We
in some way or another,
Or you
so
could-
that we don't reach an 8-year point and we've had a piece of land that's full of compost, and who's gonna buy it?
The way
That's
people
my
walk the
concern.
dirt, I don't ever see us running out of room over there.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody want to bring up any service areas they'd like questions on to modify? We're going to get to departments next, but
Can you give me some examples of what you're defining as service areas?
leaf composting, solid waste,
We've already,
police services.
there's nothing we can do about solid waste right now without the company being willing to renegotiate.
That's correct.
Yes?
This is an opportunity for everybody to get out what they want to get out, so that's.
I would not be opposed to asking the solid waste company if they would be willing to renegotiate, to look at maybe the one-arm bandits or other similar cost-cutting measures. I know I have, my family, my 2 children, we fill up our recycling bin, the new large one, we don't always fill it up in the 2 weeks. We usually do, but we don't necessarily fill up our trash can every week. So I don't know if people have other ways to look. I would like us to ask them what they're willing to work with us on to see if we can reduce that in any, even a small increment. But I would be in favor of going to the one-arm bandits.
So, Greg, what we're really getting to is the need for a retreat in July to discuss some of these broader topical areas and have a discussion about a number of these topics where, hey, here's where we are, what's the service goal we want to deliver, what's the cost with it, what happens if we do this, penalties and all that stuff. That's more appropriate for a retreat, I would think, in the future. Yes?
How much money is a retreat going to cost us? Because we've got $3,500 on here for a retreat already.
We can sit in this room and have a retreat for nothing if we want to. I mean, I'm not sure what you're asking. All I'm suggesting is there's a need for this board to sit down and establish some goals and objectives.
Absolutely.
And discuss it. So if we want to do it and bring our own lunches and whatever, I don't care about the mechanism as much as I was just suggesting the need. So, do we have other service areas?
I have a question about the police department. In my mind, the main focus, other than our services and operation, is our police and the protection, them protecting us, and they do such a fantastic job. Is there any money in the budget, and I know this is on the opposite of what I'm talking about, of spending versus saving, for body cams for police officers?
Do you know that off the top of your head, Chief?
We didn't put any money in there.
Do you know, you have, how many officers do you have? So, so you would need double that for charging and,
No, you need 27, and they would charge it at night or in the morning when they went home, and stay here and charge and be ready for them to go.
do you know what that would cost?
We've looked at several different companies, and it could range anywhere from $70,000 to $100,000.
The cost is in the storage, though, correct?
The cost is not the cameras themselves, it's the storage.
Data storage.
Well, it's just my opinion, and before we spend and approve a budget that has $200,000 in it for events, rather than cut back, and I know we're talking about that in December and looking at that, I would rather see that money allocated to body cams for our police officers to protect them, the citizens, and that's how I feel about that.
So,
Or anywhere else we can find the money to put cameras on our officers.
okay. I know you, can I direct this towards the chief?
Sure.
I know you did a analysis, you had a couple officers test, and you learned, and that is leading to whatever future recommendation you may have, because it's not as simple as just the camera. Do we have 2 cameras going? I think the recommendation from the liability insurance carriers, we would not insure you unless you have both at this point, because one captures one and one captures another, and that gets to the storage cost.
You'd have the in-car camera, which is what we have now. And the benefits of that is if the officer's in a wreck, it's on a loop recording constantly.
Yep.
So we can actually see if the officer's at fault, because it cuts on automatically. They cut on automatically when the blue lights come on, so the traffic stops are automatically recorded. The problem that you have is without a body camera, if they go into a house or they leave the view of the camera that's in the car, then, you know, the accusations that come up against the officer, we can't investigate it. We don't have that evidence there that either convict an officer or clear based on the investigation evidence that we got. So, I mean, that's the direction that law enforcement agencies are going across the country is to get these body cams and keep the in-car cameras as well. Like I said, the cost for that is storage. And it's come down a little bit, but unfortunately, that's where we're at.
And help me a little bit. Have they, in your estimation, taken care of at the legislative level the open records law and all that kind of stuff with what's filmed on the camera, such that, or do we need to weigh in with an advocacy goal on that?
Yes, they've taken care of that. Of course, we have to make our policy and adopt what they've done in that. You know, obviously, going into a bathroom or something like that, you don't want your camera on. And there's different situations where, with privacy of the cameras on. That would be taken care of with policy as well as legislation up in Raleigh, and they're getting there.
Okay. All right, well, we can bring that forward, some of the information that we need to focus on to go forward. Operating expenditures. Are there departments we wish to modify? And one of the things, and what will happen. So one of the things that I found interesting is when I went through it, trying to pull this together, 7 departments came forward with an operating expenditure decrease. 5 have a small increase. 1, I would strongly recommend, it's governed by state statute, and we stay away from modifying anything, and that's building inspection, because there's a lot of new legislation coming up on that as well. And in the detailed budget discussions I've had with Greg and Lisa, this is one that has come up that I've gone back to them on, and they've been very consistent on this one, because the legislation is is getting tighter and tighter. And then 2 departments have what, from a percentage basis, would be a large increase: technology and then Parks and Rec. That's where we sit. So the ones that have decreased: admin, clerk, communications, downtown police, planning, and public services. And again, this is at an operating level. The small increase: finance, HR, engineering, code enforcement. And really, code enforcement, it transferred over and created a new department, but I think the total operating expense there is $4,000 or something like that. And then events. Any thoughts, suggestions that you want to get out on the table and talk about? And we'll talk about the capital side of it next, but just to get to the operating side.
We have, in this budget, over $50,000 listed as staff education in various departments. What is that? Admin has it,
It's
4,500, clerk has it, IT has it, HR, engineering, building, they all have something listed as staff education.
So almost every department has people who have some sort of certification. I'm a certified government finance officer. I'm a CPA. I'm required to take 40 hours of continuing education. I know the planners and engineers also have required education they have to take to keep their certifications. The zoning administrator does. Almost the clerks have to take continuing education. So we're required to pay for those education for all those people.
We have extensive amounts of money listed as consultants or professional services for various departments. Can you tell me something about what is professional services when these divisions request that? To give you an example, planning has $120,000 in professional services. Admin has $25,000 in professional services.
The admin one is for the continuing of the UDO, any additional help that we may need to do that.
Separate from a consultant?
Well, we changed the name in some cases from consultant because they're not only consultants. They're, for example, the planning one is Kimley Horn, that they do plan review. I think Matt could probably talk a little bit more about what that is, but that's not really a consultant. It's not like we're signing an agreement for consulting. This is, a better word is professional services, because a lot of people...
Ongoing relationship?
It's not an ongoing relationship. It's we're hiring them to do this one thing. I think in planning, they're hiring them to do a specific sort of plan reviews that they don't have the staff to do that. So
That'd be traffic impact type stuff?
Those are paid for by the developer, but there are a lot of things we get plans for that we don't have the certified experience for, structural reviews, things like that. So when a building gets too complex, we do site plans, and we have the information in our UDO to follow, but when it gets outside that scope, that's when we turn to King Horn and say, okay, we specifically outline these are the areas we want to make sure are being done according to musical engineering. And so they would follow through with it because they have a plethora of specific engineers that would then kind of review that work on our behalf and tell us what kinds of things to take back to the developer and say need to be changed because of minimum standards.
Does Kimley Horn have a standard rate that they charge for these things? Are they at all flexible and negotiable?
It's, we met with them last year to initiate kind of trying to reduce the hourly services as far as, is there a box for each line item? No, not specifically, but generally we print out each project and what their costs are and kind of get an understanding of why one may have gone over versus another, and to that degree, we pay that level of attention. It's not a menu of options, so to speak.
And also to clarify just the way the budgets and expenditures work, we have to pay in the expenditure line for those traffic analysis. We get reimbursed, but that shows up in revenue. So you're going to see that cost even though we are getting reimbursed for it.
I know.
But, I mean, yeah, I didn't know if Matt was realizing that when he said the developers pay for it, but you're going to still see that cost in that line.
What is temporary labor? Finance Division and Human Resources request temporary labor?
The Finance Department requested temporary labor because there are large things that the prior auditor did for the town that the town never did. One of those is accounting for our fixed assets. We do not have a fixed asset list, and we are required to. We are required to have an accurate list. We do not. So one of the things I was trying to do was find a college student or someone this summer that could help us go take that inventory and do that. That would be going and looking at all of our vehicles, making sure that all of our buildings and all the land that we've ever acquired is correctly accounted for. At the moment, I can't find a student that's willing to do that, but that was the hope. And HR also has some project. I'm not sure if you want to answer what the project was.
Yeah, it's the same thing actually, just specific projects. I'm only one person department, so sometimes larger projects I could use the help with, so like to keep that real.
Other comments, questions about the departments?
Are we going into specific things like cutting the events budget, or are we staying?
We're at the department level, so.
All right, Can I ask, Dina, we have, I think it said 16,000 and something in here for programming in, Parks and Rec,
Yes,
if I can remember, let me get to my line item here.
so, okay, gotcha.
$16,450 listed as programs. Can you tell me some about what that is?
Lisa, can you find it on the budget?
On the line item, it's on page 29 of 60.
That's for the new programs, Dina, that the part-time person was going to do.
Is it bundled
It's-
in with the part-time person?
So, yeah, it's in instructors for art enrichment, senior fitness day, rental of facilities to have programs, supplies for art, pottery activities, pottery wheels,
So is it bundled all together on yours sheet?
16,450.
So you're starting a programming effort. And
Yes.
you are out, you have budgeted or
It
we
just
have.
looks different on mine.
Yeah, we budgeted or proposed budget has $16,000.
What are some of the
Get this
programs
going.
that this
So
money's
that
going
is a part-time person to help out 20 hours or less,
Okay.
to help out to basically, to start art programming, advance our senior programming, that we have a very popular senior coffee that happens every month, to start classes, to do more enrichment classes,
What do you mean by enrichment classes?
like CPR, first aid for teens.
For free? We pay
Well,
for it, they do it for free?
we would do, there would be some nominal fee, but the majority would come from us. So for example, our senior coffee, our next one's in July. The cost to actually have the instructor come out and do the glass, art glass with us is like $25, but we're only charging the seniors 10 to make sure all of our seniors can come and do it with us. So there's a fee, a cost associated that we try to make it more fair for everyone to come.
So like for your senior coffees, there's a cost to rent the facility, is there?
There isn't a cost for our senior right now, but
Is there
if
in
we
the
have
McDonald
if we
house?
need, that's because it's ours.
Okay.
But if we have something, a larger, where we need a larger space, we don't have that right now. So we'd work in partnerships with some of our area churches or facilities that we can use their space.
So what does something like that cost to put on one of those senior coffees right now?
Right now, it's about
Altogether, like what are you spending?
one of our, where it's free for us, because we just have snacks and the guest speaker come. That's going to be running around 100 to 150 for them to come.
Okay. Do we have any other age-restricted programs that we do like that?
No. This is the first, we had such a calling out to bring a senior program to Waxhaw. That's what we started off with. We are doing our first fun day in the park, and that's on Wednesday, just to give you all a heads up, that Barnes Park. We are working with Union County Park and Rec and the Union County Library to bring a free program down there, so it's just costing our time to come down there for that day, and advertisement. So there's a cost to the advertisement part of it, there's a cost of flyers, and then if we have any incidental supply-wise. Is that what you're
I think
asking?
these programs are wonderful, and I think having programs for our seniors is amazing, but it's a want, not a need. When we're getting to the point we're asking more money from our public, and this is I just want to make sure that we're being as brutally efficient as we can be when we need to be. So that's what that programs line means.
It's a combination of a lot of things in that one small little line.
Greg, you said earlier to me that we put on 19 or so events a year, that's more than any other town you've seen. But it would be too late to cut anything really before Christmas, realistically. I would love to have a discussion, if the board is willing, on ways that we can cut down that's $198,000 worth of events. I'm not sure if you're just looking from January to the end of this 2019 fiscal year, what portion of that money that amounts to. But that is a great deal of money we're paying to entertain the public, a large portion of whom are not tax-paying residents. I mean, we draw in crowds from the whole area that come to our events. They're wonderful, and they're I mean, they're so much fun, and even my children love them, but it's a want, not a need. And it's an expensive want.
Is that something that we can fully discuss if we are having the July retreat, that we can go through this and?
But the budget's now.
Yeah, but the appropriate place to discuss it would be at a retreat, because fundamentally we haven't even defined a goal that events could define what an event program looks like. Events are a community development activity. I don't even know what metrics. I know, Dina, when I talked with you at which one I saw you in the parking lot, you said we're working on these metrics, and you're trying to figure out whether or not we're getting benefit. I know you're working with Kurt. What's the impact on some of the new businesses that are downtown? Is it helping them, hurting them, whatever? These things all go together. I think that this is a very appropriate topic for a retreat.
But we're being asked to approve almost $200,000 in events now.
I
don't want to
understand
approve
that.
something and then go back later and say we'll try
I understand
to
that,
later.
I understand that, but
I personally don't feel comfortable making a cut to the event budget until we do some type of citizen survey or find out what events our citizens actually do enjoy going to, want to go to. And even though I believe that we as a town maybe have evolved, maybe some of our events, maybe we don't need 2 festivals, maybe we don't need 2 parades, but there may be some new type of events we would want. And so even though we may change events, it may not necessarily be a cut in expense either. Some different types of events may still cost the same amount of money. So until we really do a survey, dig deeper into, what people want to see, I just don't feel comfortable cutting anything at this point.
Is there anything you feel comfortable cutting?
No.
Good to know.
Greg, on that 198,000, what does that include? Does that include staff salaries, police overtime, staff overtime, or is that just focused on
Those are event,
cost of?
Supplies, basically.
those are event cost. Those are not salary cost.
So the salaries, overtime, police overtime, and that's all added to the 198. Do you know what that amount is?
That detail's in the events division, so it should be all totaled up there. But we don't assign, there's no cost accounting where an event gets a number that's got police overtime rolled into it, so we don't have that level of specifics.
I just mainly wanted to know if that 198 was just the event.
That's event-specific cost, non-personnel. Oh, yeah. And I guess the other thing I did mention is there's some operational things in there too, like downtown Christmas lights. So it's not just for a specific event, so that would.
Yeah, Christmas lights are the 2 biggest things.
35,000 of that's Christmas lights.
Steve, is that?
No, I'm just looking at the difference between the operating expenditure plus the one that, versus the number in the events. I think in general, there's probably, so a couple things. I think one of the challenges that we have to figure out is we approve an event schedule in December that locks us in over the end of the fiscal year and the future fiscal year. And so maybe we kind of need to look at that and say, I know that's hard with 4th of July, but maybe we can look at something where we get through the quarter, first fiscal year quarter, and not be so heavily dependent on, we're basically locking in 6 months. I mean, I don't know how others do it, whatever, but maybe that's something, because I understand the commissioner's point in terms of we're locked in, what do we do from here? And we're approving a budget that's already been committed to. I get it. I understand that point. I also think we've seen, which is why I think we need to really discuss this from a goal standpoint, we've seen where by eliminating certain events and transitioning, first, we used to do all these First Fridays, and now we've transitioned away from that. I don't see any I see a lot of people downtown. I mean, and that's encouraged the businesses to begin to participate more. And I know Kurt's working very hard with the Main Street Board to get a downtown business association, so they start doing their own promotion. All those things have to kind of come together with this. There's also there's two things. There is, should we come up with a different way, we can always come back with a budget amendment to reduce the expenditure. I think the so that in and of itself is an option. So we do have that flexibility to reduce as we have our month-long retreat, is what it's starting to sound like, and really talk through some of these things at the level we need to. I don't know if anybody has a suggestion on events beyond some of this discussion as to what a recommendation or suggestion for discussion or consensus. But I don't.
I suggest that $198,000 is too much money. We can't afford it. It's a want.
And I mean this. I don't mean this disrespectfully, but that's not something that's your opinion. What do you suggest as an action?
That we reduce that number.
To what?
I don't know, but that seems like an awful lot when we're asking to raise taxes.
I think what Commissioner Westlick said, as far as doing surveys and take and look at what people are looking for their tax dollars. Do they want parks? Do they want $200,000 worth of events that entertain many people from out of town who are using our roads, that we're now going to pay $25 more in a vehicle fee because we use them? I mean, you can look at it different ways, but certainly a survey would come to the conclusion of which one do you want, and even if we keep $100,000 worth of events and take that other $100,000 or $98,000 or overtime and put it in a savings or fund balance to open our parks in a few years.
How long does it take to do a citizen survey and get the results back?
So it took 4 weeks to get it properly positioned. They spent 2 weeks trying to, and correct me, Jay, they took 2 weeks to test it. So we were about in a 4 to 6 week time period before we could release it.
Okay.
And then they put it out there for 2 weeks, I think.
The whole thing from designing it to getting results back was about 8 weeks?
8 weeks until it was completed, and then it took some time to, because you had a profession.
It started in January, they presented to us by
March. Yeah.
For April,
Yeah, and the thing that they do is they they're making sure it's statistically valid and representative of the whole. So it isn't everybody in Prescott weighing in because we're all together Saturday at a party.
Well,
You know,
I think it would
that's-
certainly
Can I-
decide, let the people
Right.
decide, do I really care about this, and see what the majority out of those events and what the top are, let's do them, and throw that other money, make sure we allocate that other money if we're going to spend it anyway, put it in a savings account and get one of our parks open. But
And
I
Dina
know-
is smiling in agreement here that
we
she
know
would
that the
love that.
parks, we know that the parks are a priority for people. We already know that from
The last citizens.
our survey.
Can I ask,
That's all I have to say.
Dina, what events do we have from January 2019 to the end of the fiscal year 2019? What events do we do?
Easter.
Big one's Easter.
Kaleidoscope, Memorial Day. Jamming by the track starts.
So Easter, Kaleidoscope, the Memorial Day, Jamming by the Tracks. So the budget that we are, the 198,000 that's before us now is everything from the start of the fiscal year through the end of the fiscal year, but we couldn't realistically affect anything before the Easter event anyway. Can we reduce that total number? Say events can only have this much instead of 198,000, and then do a survey, find out if any of those, if any of those spring events are a priority for the people. Find a way that Dina can then reallocate her total. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, so we, I think we're mixing and matching a couple of things, because I think the survey is really more broad, going at all services, and
Okay.
get a definitive opinion on all services and where we can improve and the like, and what they like and dislike. That would produce a result for each department, one of which would be events, and that could direct us on the events. The tricky part is going to be in the design of the survey, because I'll guarantee everybody will sign up and say, I want the event.
Yeah.
I mean, you got thousands of people coming out to the Easter egg hunt. Of course they want it. So the question really gets to, how do we design this so we get some, and I'm not good enough, that's where the experts come in. I don't think any of us are. How do we get at what we really need to get to from a needs standpoint? But yes, we certainly, we could
My concern is that
we can do a survey
198,000.
anytime we want. And we always talked about, let the survey percolate for a good year, which it has, and then come back and do a service survey.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the survey from 2017, and it's 65% satisfied with the quality of events and the frequency of events. So I do think that that's a big difference between the 95% that was satisfied with public services. So I think there is some room to make an adjustment there. And to Commissioner Lee's point regarding the overtime, I don't want our staff to always have to work every single holiday. It seems like we have an event for every holiday almost. And I'd like for them to have their time with their family on those holidays.
But you just said you didn't want to cut anything from events.
Not at this point. I don't want to cut anything at events because we haven't had a survey. I don't feel comfortable making a cut without knowing what the people want. I mean, there's a big difference between costs in each event. The festivals are costing, $30,000 for the festival, which is a big difference between, a lower priced event, $10,000 for Festival of Lights or something.
So what do we want to do? I think I've heard we want to spend $35,000 on a survey.
That's how much it costs?
That you want to get it statistically accurate, you darn straight. And by the way, it's been done by the people we use do it across North Carolina for all the municipalities. So they've fine-tuned this approach. So it's not cheap because it has to be statistically valid. You have to use mail, you have to use online, you have to do a multitude of ways to make sure you get all demographics and all that stuff.
Okay, so let me ask this question. Since we're not really supposed to be going into line items, if we say we all agree to reduce events by a certain dollar amount, we aren't able to say which events we want to cut.
No, that's
either.
up to
That would be up to,
That's
right,
up-
so,
Or if we cut any event.
right.
Might
So,
be a more efficient way for her to allocate her funds, which I would be fine with, reducing that number and then trusting Dina to come up with the best use of that money.
I'm also very uncomfortable about talking about cuts without having gone through, and a survey is a good idea, but a survey is only one of the tools that we could possibly, talk about when we have a wider discussion about events, parks and recreation, all these things that are topics for retreats. I think it's foolish to go and cut something without having thoroughly gone through it and know what the ramifications are going to be 6 weeks from now, 6 months from now, 6 years from now. I think that it's been talked about several times before that once this budget is passed, that we as a board and a manager and CFO, department heads, and everybody else get seriously into preparing for this time next year where we have taken steps like we have this year to be better than last year's budget, that we want to be even better next year. But we're going to do that through discussion. We're going to do that through studying it. We're going to do that through partnering with other people. We're going to, there's a lot of things that have to be examined before we make these kind of decisions.
I'm not comfortable kicking the can down the road.
It's
and
not
saying-
kicking the can down the road. No, it's not kicking the can.
I wasn't done speaking yet, sir.
I'm
I
sorry.
wasn't done speaking yet,
Right.
sir.
Hang on a second.
Okay.
Hang on. Let her finish, and then you can.
I'm not comfortable kicking the can down the road saying it's too early, there's not enough time to look at this, we'll do a survey later, we'll have a retreat later, when I'm being asked to put my name on a budget now. If there's nothing that can be changed, if there's not enough time to change anything in this budget, then there's no need to have us vote to approve it. You can't do anything about it. If we are asked to approve it, then there must be room to alter it. The first slide you put up said to discuss it said the word alterations or changes was in there. There is time to change this budget before we approve it. That's why we're asked to approve it. Now is the time to buckle down and say, what are the wants, what are the needs, which is a phrase you yourself used, Steve,
Yes.
Mayor. What are our wants, what are our needs?
First off,
Commissioner
Yeah.
Burrow first.
this is not kicking anything down the road, okay? This is going down the road with your eyes wide open and trying to find the right way to get there. And I resent your comment. I really do. You're disrespectful often.
Excuse me, sir.
Hang
Very
on, hang on,
disrespectful.
Kat, hang on. Hang on.
It was a very
Finish.
disrespectful comment, okay? Now, we're not kicking it down the road. We're going forward. We're going to examine it. We're going to do what we're sent here to do, what we were elected to do. That's to be stewards of the people's money, not just shoot at the budget. We're going to examine the budget, and we're going to come up with the best way to do this. We're going to improve it next year, the year after that, right on down the road. So that's as far, I'm finished talking.
Commissioner
May
Mayor
I
Pro Tem,
May I ask a
you
question?
were next.
We're saying that we will or possibly have this retreat in July.
Correct.
I understand the need to reduce the cost, and I understand that. I'm in agreement with that. Is it possible that some of the events moving forward, since we're doing the budget now for this year, that reducing the costs going forward for the end of the year, some of those events, if it's, July would be too late to do anything for the July 4th, but whatever comes up in October, November, December, if we're reducing costs, that we can look at those type of events moving forward, and then you can present to us some more information regarding what's involved in putting together the autumn treasures or the spring events that we had, and what that $30,000 cost was for the last event we had a month ago, or what it costs for the July 4th event moving forward. So we have a breakdown of exactly what's going on, what's going out, where the overtime is, so that we can see exactly what's being spent for those events, and then say, hey, we would like to slice the $198,000 down to $100,000, because now we have realistic information to use to see exactly where the money is, what it's being used for, what's happening with those events, maybe even get feedback from the stores downtown or the people there, or numbers or something, so that we have something to base it on. And then we can make reductions in a more proficient way. Is that possible to do that in July?
What are you asking?
The event person.
So,
Can we
so
ask-
no, that's not a question for her.
Is
That's,
that
that's
for
a,
Craig?
that is a massive work effort that would have to entail. Greg, I don't know if you want to weigh in. What, go ahead.
I would just say, elevate the discussion back
Right.
to what the goals and objectives are for events.
Right.
If we're getting into a specific event, we can provide a lot of detail about specific events and costs and all that kind of stuff, but what do we want to accomplish with events? Do we want to have 3, or do we want to have 10? Do we want to spend $10,000, or are we comfortable spending $150,000? Give us some parameters, and then we can come back to you with an appropriate mix. There's going to be some untouchables, and we know what those untouchables are. The things that you don't want to, and maybe there are not as many untouchables as I think there might be, but we have a holiday event for everything that's related to veterans. I'm not going to be on the forefront proposing that those are the first ones on the chopping block, but if the community decides that you don't value one of those events, we don't have to have it. But I'm not going to make an assumption that any of that kind of stuff's touchable. Same thing with the holidays. You know, are those Christmas, Easter, are those touchable? Or do we want to simply look at ways to slim back what we're spending on those holidays? But we need some goals. We need some sort of parameter. Otherwise, the only other approach is just to come in and take the cleaver to it and go, $50,000 needs to be cut. Just go do it. The results of that exercise might not be particularly fun either, because there's 6 different opinions about how that 50 could be reduced, and we'll come back with a reduction strategy, and it won't get 6 head nods that you like the way it happened. So that's why, again,
That's your duty. I mean, that's.
we'll
we'd
do
have
it.
to-
If
we'd
we're
have to turn that
instructed to
you.
cut 50, we'll cut 50, but it doesn't mean that everybody's going to be happy about it. So again, the best productive use of everybody's time is to define what we're trying to achieve with events. If we think downtown is so successful that we don't need to do events downtown, great. Let's declare victory and move on. I don't think we're there. There's maybe some events that you want to move around to other parts of the town. That's a good thing. But we need to have that conversation to understand what the strategy is that we're trying to fund. My biggest concern has been that we not add anything else, and we've been very clear about it. Let's don't even entertain anybody bringing anything in that then gets dumped on the town, and we've got several of these. They were great ideas. Somebody started it, and then we've inherited it, and now it's hard to pull the plug on it. But those are some of those difficult conversations we need to have in a framework, and a retreat type environment is really the most productive, because to keep it, what are the goals that we're trying to achieve?
Mr. Mayor?
And in all honesty, they did a good job. I think it's like a little bit, it's between 4% and 5% increase from an operating expenditure on events. So I see the effort that you put in. Yeah, Commissioner.
May I address the accusation that was made against me?
Yeah.
I have sat on this board, sir, for approximately 6 months. In that time, you have complained at me because you didn't like the term whip the vote, because as it turns out, you didn't know what it means. You have lectured me on what is my job and is not my job from that very seat you're sitting in. When I called for this meeting, the only person to respond to my email, I give you credit, was you. But the response was that you didn't see any need to have this meeting. I have not, sir, ever been disrespectful to you or the seat you hold. I will not tolerate being accused of such anymore. I have heard you complain about what isn't your job, what you are being asked to take on that you did not wish to take on. If this job is too much for you, It is okay.
All right.
Lady, that's very
All right,
disrespectful.
let's stop.
That's
Let's
extremely
stop. Back on topic to the budget. If we want to have an argument about what is respect and disrespectful, we will do that afterwards, out of camera. We are not.
Excuse me.
We're not going there.
Excuse me.
We're not.
I am going to go there. That was a disgusting.
Okay, that's enough.
And
Enough.
that's it.
Enough. We are fundamentally at a point where, and Greg's words were appropriate, we either have a tax increase and a vehicle fee philosophically, or we don't. And we have to call that. You're basically saying, after going through it, and I can't remember what the exact dollar amount was, but when the departments initially came in, you've cut $600,000 from that, and you're actually coming in at $200,000 below where we were last year. So you've done what the subject matter expert should do, the budget officer should do, and this is a proposed budget. So if we want to, what I hear is two philosophical differences right now. And I honest to God, don't care which side you're on. We have to get to what the board decides they want to do and adopt a budget. And if some of this is about trust of the manager and the finance director, I'm just going to say, Lisa, you've done a fabulous job. Greg, you've done a fabulous job of working this through to where this is light years where we've come from. So thank you for all your work. I don't want any of this discussion for you guys to think it reflects on you. You've done great work. That said, we've reached a point where we need to make some decisions. Do we want to cut events or not? There's a suggestion on the table.
No.
No.
Yes.
It is a no, but are we going to be able to
It's a topic for the retreat.
and that we can then discuss ways of moving forward and reducing the cost of the events or event services at that time?
Or if the survey comes back and says double it, would you consider that? I don't know what.
Not doubling.
But
it's a topic that
see,
we
this
can-
is okay. I'm just going to say it this way. This is the part where we don't even know what Dina will come back with. Maybe there's a fee structure that could be put in place. I get tired of directing traffic down on Waxhaw Marvin and seeing all the Marvinites come in, and they take advantage of what we have to offer. I get that. Is that something that we can do? I'd look to staff who knows this better to come back and say, hey, here's a recommendation, suggestion. We might be able to pay for these events. I don't know the answer to that question. Somehow, some way, when you get $600 down there for a concert on a Friday night, there ought to be a way that it pays for itself somehow, some way. But that takes structure. I'd look to the staff to figure that out. But my point in saying that, Mayor Pro Tem, is we got to keep our minds open.
Okay, but I'm just asking, is that something that's open for discussion at the
Absolutely.
retreat in July?
Absolutely.
So as long as it's open that we can do that moving forward, then what's your question?
Vince?
Am I cutting it now?
Yes.
No, but with further
Okay,
discussion.
no. So that's consensus is no. Do we have any other departments we may want to make adjustments to or consider adjustments to? To the income side. Sanitation is out. Sticking with that?
What do you mean sanitation is out?
The proposed budget, we have to react to the proposed budget. Had a recommendation of an $80, was it solid waste or sanitation fee? I don't know what the exact title, but the direction was we will not go with that. So are we staying with that with the proposed, as a comment back to the proposed budget?
I'm fine with the sanitation fee at the motor vehicle fee and the property tax levy end.
2.5 cents.
I would prefer a sanitation fee over the property tax increase, but either way, yes.
I'm not in favor of any of those.
Okay. No,
I'm not in favor of.
of any of them?
I'm in favor of it either way, whichever is best.
So the manager recommended, since you said it, whichever's best, the manager recommended in the proposed budget a sanitation fee. So that's what he said is best. We turned it around and said a tax levy increase. So the recommendation from the manager, what is best, is an $80 sanitation fee. The difference is during a calendar, not that you would do that because of the way it's billed, but the difference is you have a little bit more flexibility with a fee than a tax levy. The tax levy's there, period. So both of you have said whichever's best, so I don't know what direction to give the manager. What he suggested is best is the sanitation fee.
My
You want to
only-
go with that or not?
I mean, if you just want me just to explain
Sanitation
why.
fee, I'm just going to
Okay.
go. Sanitation fee.
I would prefer to stay with the ad valorem tax because it is,
So no to the sanitation fee.
Yes.
Yes to the sanitation fee.
No.
Give me a second. I'm trying to decide between the tax and the fee. Because I said no to the fee initially and yes to the tax. But with the tax, you're saying that there's, and in discussing it with Greg, that there's more control over the fee than there is with the tax.
We already have
I'm
three
just-
no's.
I'm just-
We have 3 no's already.
No to what?
No, yes, no, no. So that's 3 no's to the sanitation fee.
He didn't say no.
I said ad
Yes, he
valorem
did.
tax.
Oh,
He-
no to the, yes to
No to the
tax.
fee,
We,
yes to the tax.
here's
Oh.
the question on the table. Sanitation fee.
No.
Yes.
No.
No.
Motor vehicle fee.
Can I ask one clarification
Yeah.
question on the motor vehicle fee? Greg, is there a legal limit that fee can be?
Yes, and contrary to what's been stated, it can't be raised. That's the maximum allowed by state law right now.
So forever, next year, the year after that, the year after that, the year after that, it can only be $25 per vehicle.
And I clarified that at the last meeting, and it's been repeated incorrectly in publications, but yeah, it cannot be raised. That's the maximum amount. The only way you could raise that is be if you had a transit system. So if we had a transit system, we could levy $5 more, but we don't have a
And
transit
it'd have to
system.
go to the transit
It'd
system.
have to go to the transit system. So we're
Clarify.
maxed out right there.
Just clarifying.
Good question. So
Motor
Vehicle fee.
vehicle fee, yes.
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 property tax levy increased 2.5 cents.
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Are there any other questions you need clarification on? We have not modified, but had a rich discussion on expenditures. Do you have what you need, Lisa, to modify the budget ordinance for tomorrow?
Yeah, the ordinance that was in the packet is this.
Is there any changes to the wording part in the beginning of the
That, Greg,
document?
that, Greg, actually goes back to, there's the manager, sorry, I didn't mean to be disrespectful. The manager goes back and modifies the words based upon the input he's got. So
Will we see that before tomorrow?
tomorrow has nothing to do with the words, it has to do with the budget ordinance.
numbers.
Just the budget ordinance from page 21, in essence, to whatever ending page in the fees, correct? I mean,
So that's the only part that we vote on tomorrow?
that's correct. That's correct.
Can we clarify something just for the citizenry, please? Just so that there's no misunderstanding out there. If there was a choice of either a sanitation fee or a property tax increase, So it wasn't that there could have been three things. That's what I want to make sure people understand. I wasn't voting for a sanitation fee and a property tax increase.
So what the manager recommended was 2 fees in his proposed budget. What the
I
bo-
understand.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm
citizen.
clarifying
Okay.
for all that are listening. What the board has decided, we will adopt 1 fee, or propose to adopt 1 fee and a tax increase of 2.5 cents. So, yeah, that's,
I just want to make sure I'm not accused out there of wanting to add a tax fee or a tax increase and a sanitation fee and a vehicle fee. That's my purpose.
I'm just going to say this, it's the majority of the board, so it's not you being accused.
Oh, I know.
It's the majority. So, and I'm sure names will be used, but it's the will of the board as it goes forward. It's not you. All right, any other questions, comments? I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Anybody in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.